On the night when the moon called her name, Lena had her window cracked open to let in the lake breath, the wet, metallic ribbon of air that smells like pennies and rain. She was alone in the house, if you can call that old place alone, when the wood keeps its own creaks, when the radiators sigh like sleeping dogs, when the hallway murmurs long after you've walked it. Lena sat at her desk. She'd been grading papers for the substitute job, 40 versions of the same essay, What Home Means to Me, and she'd written the same note again and again in the margins. Be specific. When the sound came, it wasn't a sound at all. It was a pressure, like someone leaning close and speaking directly inside her ear without breath or voice. Her own name was the first sign. Not the name from her ID or her email, not Lena, clipped short like a sentence ending, but the older one, the name her mother used only when she sang, the long-bone version her grandmother wrote on the inside cover of a Russian fairy tale book, Elena. Elena, said the moon. She knew it was the moon because she looked up and it was too large, too near, too exact. It sat fat white over Blackthorn Lake, so detailed she could count the pits and fractures of its face like a palm reader reading lines. The window glass rippled once. The papers shifted on her desk and arranged themselves by date with a soft, papery hush. Okay, Lena whispered, because she had the ridiculous instinct to be polite. Okay, that's not real. In the kitchen, the clock stuttered. Tick, tick, ti, ti, ti. A moth flapped at the light bulb and spelled her name with its shadow on the wall. 3 clumsy strokes. She thought this is a symptom, lack of sleep. But her body knew the difference between the weirdness she could blame on nerves and the weirdness that has nothing to do with you. This was the second kind. Elena, said the moon, and beneath her feet the house took in a breath. She turned off the lamp. Darkness flattened the room. Outside, the lake accepted the moon's glare like a mirror gives back a face, distorted but honest. The water seemed higher than it had any right to be, licking over the rocks, nosing toward the grass. The wind moved, and then, abruptly, it stopped, as if someone put a finger to its lips. Who's there? Lena said, to the idea of a prankster, to the idea of being ridiculous, to the idea of you can't be hearing this. Everything answered at once. The phone on the dresser glowed with a notification. It was a voicemail from a number that had no digits, just a blank dash, as if the absence called her. In the hallway mirror, her reflection lifted a hand a fraction of a second late. From the cabinet above the sink came the delicate sound of glass tinkling together, although she hadn't moved. And from outside the open window, over the black mouth of the lake with a giant moon above it, she heard her grandmother's voice, the exact rasp and warmth of it, sing one line of a lullaby, then cough, then say in Russian, "Don't answer, little bird." Lena did not know she was moving until she found herself at the window. She pressed her palms to the sill. She could smell cold water. She could smell lilies, sour and green. The moon glowered down, patient as a landlord. Elena. She remembered a story from childhood. Her grandmother had told her once, when the lights went out and the candles burned low, that names of tides. The tide pulls blood through your body, pulls your thoughts through the day, pulls your face into being each morning. And if the moon ever calls your name whole and long, your true name, then the tide changes direction. She'd laughed back then and said, "What happens if it calls my true name?" "You stop belonging to clocks," her grandmother had said. "You stop belonging to doors." "Do I stop belonging to people?" "Only if you answer." The moon waited. The lake waited harder. "Not tonight," Lena said, and drew the window shut. She clicked the lock. The lock clicked back and then clicked once more on its own, as if a second lock had slid into place. She did not own a second lock. Her phone vibrated. Another voicemail. Then another. 8 in a row. The name on the display. Elena. She went to the kitchen with small steps, the way you step in an unfamiliar room, even when the room is your own. The living room window stared. The hallway yawned too long, as if someone had pulled it to stretch like taffy. When she reached the kitchen, she stopped because the clock over the stove was melting. Not dripping, not melting, but the hands had softened into silver threads that drooped towards 6 and, with a tiny suck of sound, slid right off and fell into a puddle of white-blue light on the tile. The puddle wasn't wet. It was moonlight liquefied. It cast a cold sheen around her, and shadows crawled backward up the walls like spilled ink being unspilled. Elena. Her grandmother's voice, again, from nowhere and everywhere. Do not answer, little bird. Lena did what any person would do. She backed into the pantry and shut the door and stood there with the brooms and the jars of beans and the stale cinnamon and held her breath until the darkness gathered into the shape of her own fear. Something tapped the pantry door from the inside. She flipped on the pantry light, panicked and irritated at once, as if her own nerves had pranked her.
Jars, broom, mops.
The ordinary inventory of a small life. Then the phone rang, not a voicemail chime, but a ring like it used to ring when she was a kid. Braying. Braying. The sound vibrated through every shelf. The pantry light flickered. She answered because she had to, because nobody can stand to be alone when something knows your name. Hello. Her voice sounded thin, the shadow of a voice trying to stand up straight. On the other end, nothing. Wind maybe. A distant ssh, as if the receiver were filled with sand. Then a whisper, so faint she thought she imagined it. We thought you were lost. She hung up. The word we hit her like a cold wave. The pantry door breathed against her wrist. Once, twice, like a dog nosing to be let out. She reopened it to show the air that nothing was there. The clock had righted itself on the wall. The puddle of light was gone, folded back into shadow. The moon still watched, fat and ostentatious. Okay, Lena said aloud, to the empty house, to herself. New rule. No answering. The house, very softly, clicked its tongue. It rained on and off all the next day, the kind of skinny rain that hardly spots the sidewalk but makes the world smell fresh and moldy at once. Lena tried normal. She made coffee that tasted like ash. She graded 3 essays and wrote Be Specific once. She moved a stack of cookbooks from the counter to the bookshelf and back again, as if shelving the recipes might shelve a night. The lake wore a gray cap. The moon was a polite coin, faint enough to ignore. She ignored it. At noon, she walked down to the shore to check the dock. The dock was old, and old things here had a way of drifting away. As she reached the waterline, she saw them. Footprints. A neat set, leading from the edge of the lake up onto the sand, and then across the grass to her back steps. They were hers. Barefoot, narrow, left, right. She could pick out the scar on the heel where she'd stepped on a bottle's rim when she was 14 and thought she wouldn't cry. But the sand around the prints was undisturbed. No scuff, no spray. Her prints arrived from the lake as if she'd been walking on the surface and stepped onto land without sinking. They were reversed, too. The impressions pressed upward, as if something had stepped onto the world from beneath it. Absolutely not, Lena said. Her own voice comforted her with its unimpressed music. That's not even clever. She followed the trail up the steps. The last print was on her back door, at shoulder height, the smeared suggestion of a palm, her palm, pressed flat against the glass, from the inside. When she tried the door, it was unlocked. She knew she'd locked it. She always locked it. She locked things the way people left light switches in certain positions or closed their eyes during prayers they didn't believe in. A habit can be a superstition you can't afford to mock. Inside, on the kitchen table, lay the fairy tale book. The old one, thin and frilled with age, the cover cloth scuffed where her grandmother's thumbs used to rub when she read. Lena hadn't taken it down in years. It should have been on the top shelf of the bedroom bookcase, rubber-banded to hold in the loose pages. Now it lay open. There were no pictures on the open spread. There was only handwriting, a neat, square hand she recognized immediately. Her grandmother's pen had carved down deep, making the paper ripple with valleys and ridges. The ink was faded to a kind of tea color, and new droplets of water dotted the margin, as if the book had just been taken out of a lake. If the moon speaks your true name, it read, you must borrow another name. You must be unknown to it until dawn. The moon only knows what is named. You must belong to something smaller. Then, if it is too late, if you have already answered. The pen stroke stopped. The sentence slumped into a wavering line. Below, in a different ink, a different hand had written, "It is too late." The house listened to her read, the way a dog pricks its ears when you say the right word. The refrigerator clicked. A pipe in the wall sighed once, long and low. She touched the page. The paper was cool. The water dots bled, pale halos. Lena did not remember answering. But maybe you answer without speaking. Maybe looking up is answering. Maybe not running is answering.
Her phone chimed.
Text from an unknown number, a different kind of dash this time. The message: "You can still belong to us." Another message arrived before she could think. A photo. She stared. It was herself, asleep in her own bed last night, the sheets of froth around her like the edges of foam when the lake laps rock. Her mouth was slightly open. Her hand lay palm up on the pillow, as if she'd expected to hold something, but had thought better of it. "Who are you?" she texted, fingers shaking only a little. "This isn't funny." The reply came quick. "Do not be upset. We are not people." Then, "We are not joking." She turned the phone face down on the table and went to the sink and splashed water on her face and stared into the window above the faucet. Her reflection stared back like a good student. She lifted her hand. The mirror lifted half a second late again. She let the water run and run until the mirror caught up with her and then surpassed her, lifting its hand before she could. She turned off the tap. The lake, visible through the window, looked as if it were breathing. The surface swelled, then softened flat again, a giant chest under a sheet. Wind pushed clouds like sheep. The moon, faint, watched between their bellies. "Be specific," she said to the air, and then wished she hadn't. The air liked rules. Her front doorbell rang. She jumped. Then she laughed at herself because who was she, a heroine in a bad horror movie, afraid of the doorbell? She wiped her hands on a towel and went to the front hall. The door's glass pane showed a silhouette, a man, thin and tall, with a hat brim like a slice of night. She thought of the word undertaker and then forbade herself to think of it. She opened the door. No one stood there. She looked down instinctively. There were footprints on her porch, but not the kind feet make. They were circles, small and precise, inked in a pale dust like pollen. They led from the top step to the threshold and stopped. The air smelled like lilies again, too sweet, damp as a basement. "Hello," she said, because apparently she had not learned. The street was empty except for the mailman 4 houses down and someone's faded plastic snowman, which the neighbor kept on the lawn year-round as a joke that was old enough to earn a right to stay. Something moved behind her. She turned too fast and saw nothing but the hallway's long body stretching to the back door. At the far end, her grandmother's photograph hung crooked. She didn't remember it hanging crooked. She didn't remember it being there at all. Lena closed the front door very gently, as if she didn't want to wake at dusk. The lake bells rang. This was not normal because the lake had no bells. It started as a tremor, a sound you felt rather than heard, deep bone vibration, like thunder you swallowed. Then the note rose, gahum, a single, enormous tone, thin as a wire, steady as a thought that won't let go. The noise threaded through the rooms. Every pane of glass hummed. Lena went out onto the back steps because hiding indoors made her feel like a mouse that had learned math. The sky had paled into that hour, when colors look like they've been painted over with milk. The moon was brighter, bolder. The lake wore it like a coin in its mouth. Across the water, the dark line of the opposite shore held steady. Trees stood shoulder to shoulder like bouncers. Then, slowly, with a motion almost too slow to see until it wasn't, the line moved nearer. The lake rose without waves, as if a planet beneath it had stood up. The bell chimed again, and this time Lena heard the shape of the sound. Not a bell as in a church tower, but the bell of a buoy, one of those red cylinders that bob and nod like sleepy birds. Except there were no buoys on Blackthorn Lake. There were rules here. Everyone who grew up in Greywater Hollow knew the rules, and Rule 1 was do not marker the water. The sound slid into the kitchen, found the glass in the cupboard, and made the glasses sing politely back. The old fairy tale book crackled its pages like old men cracking knuckles. The house itself seemed to adjust its shoulders. Elena, said the moon. She did not answer. She thought of the other names she could borrow. Ellen, Lenny, and she thought of renting a name like an apartment. Month to month, furnished, utilities included. The bell sounded a third time, and with it came a new sound, underneath, a murmur newer than language, older than thinking. It said, "Come and look," but not with words. Lena tried to be careful. She tried to be the person who knows not to glance over the edge of the cliff when someone says don't. She tried, and then she went down the path to the water because trying is small against being called by something with continents for bones. At the shore, the sand was smooth. No footprints. The lake didn't lap. It lay there like poured glass. Only the faintest quiver showed that it remembered the word water. Out where the bell should have been, a small shape bobbed. Not red like a buoy. White, the color of fingernails. It rose and fell with a breath that wasn't air. Lena waded in up to her ankles. The water was warmer than her skin, and that was wrong. It was wrong in the way a mouth smiles too long. She froze. She stepped back onto land. The shape in the water bobbed once more, then stopped bobbing and turned, not like an object but like a head. It faced her. "Elena," it said, but the voice came from the moon. She pegged a detail she had been avoiding. The dark crescent inside the moon's bright rim was not shadow, not quite. It had texture, a scum-bled gray like fur seen at a distance. It moved a little when she was not quite looking. "Not tonight," she said, as if to a persistent caller. "I belong to something smaller." The lake listened. Then, with the faintest sound, like a fish kissing the surface, the shape of the buoy slipped under. The bell did not stop. It went on, quieter now, coming up through the weeds, through the stone, through the soles of her feet. It was the sound of metal rung in a cathedral full of silt. It was the bell of a city drowned long ago, under a lake that had never been a lake. She could hear, underneath it, a music of ropes tensioning and slackening, a chorale of rivets adjusting, the sigh of wood deciding whether it would float or sink. Behind her, her house unlocked its own door. She turned and saw it, the back door easing open an inch, 2 inches, the crack growing slow as a grin. Light fell down the steps in a rectangle. Somebody's shadow moved inside the light, and Lena knew like you know the shape of your own mouth in the dark, that it was her shadow, and she was standing outside watching herself move inside. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't want to look. She looked. A text. "We are at the hinge. We are at the part of the story where the lid knows the box." Another. "You still belong. You can belong to us." She did what her grandmother would have done. She dug in her pocket and pulled out the wooden rosary she kept for luck even though luck never stuck to it. She wrapped it tight around her fingers until the beads pressed crescents into her skin. She looked up at the moon. Too bright now. Too large. The seas on its face like bruises. "Stop," she said. "Find another girl." The lake said nothing. The bell tolled a 4th time. Somewhere deep in the sound, a hinge closed. 4, the borrowed name. You wanted terrifying. You wanted unexpected. Lean close. At midnight, Lena waited in the dark living room with a thrift store knife on the coffee table and the fairy tale book on her lap. She had closed every curtain, and wherever a sliver of moonlight squeezed in, it made a perfect blade on the floor. The house vibrated softly, as if purring or trying not to. She needed a borrowed name. Her grandmother had told a story about fishermen who used the names of moths when they went out on forbidden nights. A moth's name is soft, but it confuses the sky. A moth's name tells the moon you are not worth the pull. Lena whispered, "I am Luna Moth. I am Polyphemus. I am Afterlight." Nothing happened. She tried a bigger lie. "I am nobody." The mirror in the hall snorted. The house did not like lies you didn't mean. She turned the fairy tale book pages carefully. The paper made tiny sighs. There, a new page she did not remember. Ink that looked wet. "Borrow the name of a smaller thing," it said, "but not too small." Borrow the name of something that knows the dark but is not made by it. Borrow the name of a door. Then, as if the pen had been taken from the writer mid-thought, a line that began, "If the moon has learned your steps." The words after they were scratched out, not erased.
Claude. Fine. A door, then.
A door knows the dark. A door belongs to both sides, and neither. Lena, fixed her eyes on the coffee table knife, the thrifted one, dull and unheroic, and thought, I am hinge. I am threshold. I am gap. She thought it like a mantra. She thought it until the words turned into a shape in her mouth. The moon called softly.
It did not need to shout now.
It had her number. From the kitchen, the refrigerator coughed twice, and then the hum it always made stopped. The silence after was a held breath. The walls ticked as if they had cooled too fast. A mouse skittered in the ceiling. It sounded like handwriting. The front door knocked. Not a hand knock. A careful set of taps. 3 slow, 2 quick, 1 slow. It was the rhythm her grandmother used when she came back from the garden with her hands full of cucumbers and couldn't dig for her keys. Lena almost stood to open it, the muscle memory so deep it had outlived grief. She did not move. The knocking stopped. After a moment, the back door began to open, not from the handle but from the edges, as if the wood remembered it was part of a tree and wished to be a tree again. The door sighed itself ajar, and then, gently, it closed. She felt it then, a presence in the hall, not heavy, not light. The way a new idea shares a room with you before you admit it out loud. She looked at the dark doorway and saw herself. She saw the silhouette of her own head, shoulders, body. Not a mirror, the angles were wrong. Not a trick, the moonlight was a straight blade. Her other self was darker than the dark. It was moonshadow, when the moon is too bright to make sense. Elena, it whispered. No, she said, and tried to hold threshold in her mouth. I'm not her. I'm the word slid. It didn't want to be spoken. I'm door. A laugh. Not cruel. Not kind. The sound a cellar makes when you open it after a long time. The other Lena stepped into the room. You have noticed, haven't you, that there is no wind. There are no night insects. Even the settling of the house has gone timid. The only sound is the bell under the lake, far away like a memory in someone else's head. The other Lena moved closer until the moonlight cut her in half, and she became in two. The left side was her shadow. The right side was the idea of her, a space where she might be. Through that space, Lena could see the couch, the knife, the book on her lap, only not quite right. The book's title was not the title she knew. The knife had no handle. The couch's cushions were turned inside out. We thought you were lost, said the other. It was the same whisper from the phone, not a voice but the outline of a voice. You belong to clocks less and less. I got better, Lena said, because fear sometimes wears sarcasm as armor. I ate some toast. We remember toast, said the other. We buttered the dark. Unexpected, yes? Terrifying? You wanted more. Here. The moon widened a little more, and the floors rose with it, like bread under a heat that isn't fire. Beneath Lena's feet, the boards flattened, smoothed, became as slick as lake ice. The knife on the table slid an inch toward her knee, then another inch away, as if deciding which version of gravity to obey. I'm not going with you, Lena said. We are not going, said the other. We are arriving. It reached out a hand. The hand was not a hand. It was the space a hand makes when it moves through air, wake, wash, hollow. If it touched you, you would be touched only by the absence left behind. Don't, Lena said, and meant it with every cell. My name is not Elena. My name is Threshold. My name is... The house made a small, distressed sound. It was the sound a cheap chair makes when somebody stands too quickly. It was the sound of a wire being plucked, ping, and then held between two fingers until it died. Borrowed names break, said the other. Not unkindly. But don't be afraid. Fear is for people. I am a person. For now. The bell under the lake ceased. In the emptied-out silence came another sound from outside. Footsteps in the yard, quick and light and many. Foxes, Lena thought with a flash of normality, grateful for the possibility of foxes. She uncurled, stood, took one step toward the window and stopped, because the shadows on the lawn were wrong. They were fox-shaped but moved upright. They were small but too long. Their heads tilted up to sniff the light as if tasting it. Every one of them had the same face. Her face. Not the details, eyes, nose, mouth, but the arrangement, the expression, the tilt, the way a face is a habit. Her habit multiplied. They paused at the edges of the yard as if respecting a fence that wasn't there. Then, together, they turned their heads toward the lake, toward the bright meat of the moon, and in the same human voice, her voice, they said, softly, Elena. The other Lena smiled at the chorus. It opened its knot hand and, like a spill moving not outward but inward, swept its absence toward Lena's wrist. She reacted without thinking. She threw the knife. It passed through the other, as if through an old photo. It hit the wall with a thud. The handle broke. The blade spun and fell, and the house, clearly offended, rattled the picture frames. Child, said the other, though they were the same age. Metal doesn't keep you. Names do. Then the unexpected thing. The fairy tale book grew hot on her lap, so hot she hissed. The pages stiffened. The words rose from the paper like embossed braille. Without knowing she had decided to, Lena tore out a page and crumpled it, and, panic is a kind of invention, stuffed the paper into her mouth. It tasted like pond and ink and dust. It tasted like waking in a tent after rain. She chewed, gagged, swallowed, felt the page settle in her like a coin you are ashamed to have eaten. Be specific, she told herself out loud, because survival sometimes needs instruction. I am the hinge of this door in this house at this hour. I am wooden pin and wood. I open and close for people. I refuse the moon. The other paused. The fox shadows in the yard cocked their heads simultaneously, as if listening to a faraway station. Lena stood slowly. The house shifted under her like a horse feeling a rider decide to stay. She put one hand on the arm of the couch. She placed her bare foot carefully on the boards. She did not look directly at the other. She looked at the space beside it where her living room should be, where it was only out of place. She allowed herself one breath of anger that anything thought it could rename her. Then she said, very softly, not tonight, and stepped forward through the other, as if through a curtain of cool smoke. Everything in the room rearranged with a soft thump. The knife lay unbroken on the table. The fairy tale book shut itself like a mouth. The fox shadows snapped their heads toward her and began to back away on two legs, and as they did their legs shortened, their heads rounded, their shapes became moths, became flecks, became nothing at all. Outside, the lake exhaled. Elena, said the moon, confused for the first time. Not tonight, she repeated firmer. I belong to smaller things. The other smiled once, very wide, as if proud. It stepped backward into the hall and grew thinner and thinner until it was a line, and then a seam, and then only the suggestion that seams exist. The house let out its breath in a long, shuddering peal of radiator hiss. Lena closed her eyes. She listened. There was the hum of the refrigerator returning to its bad habit. There was the clock, hands re-stiffened, ticking a proper lie. There was the breath of the wind prying grass blades apart for gossip. She opened her eyes and saw that the window was no longer a blade, but only glass. Her phone buzzed with one more message. She didn't want to look. She looked. We'll try again when the moon is heavier, it said.
You're still yourself for now.
Underneath that, another line formed letter by letter, as if someone were live typing from inside the lake. But, Elena, you did answer. You answered the first time. It takes the moon a while to collect what it is owed. In the meantime, we advise you to make a list. A list of what? She said to the air, to the phone, to the idea of the moon. The final message came, and as it did, the moonlight in the room dimmed, not darker, but thinned, as if some of it had been scooped out and carried away in cupped hands. Make a list of what you are willing to stop being. The phone went dark. Outside, the bell under the water chimed once, faint and final. And somewhere in the house, From a room that hadn't existed until now. Third floor, north. Past the wall that should have been the roof. Someone who had her voice and not her name began to hum her grandmother's lullaby.